What happens when law, business, and life collide? Each week on Lead Counsel, your host Tom Tona will take a deep dive into topics related to the law, the business of law, and life. There will be insightful discussions with industry insiders, experts, and thought leaders making significant contributions and meaningful differences in their fields of expertise. Tom is the founder and managing attorney at TonaLaw. He has been a practicing attorney since 1994 and the leader of TonaLaw since it opened in 2001. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with free information on law and the business of law, and to give you actionable tools related to each of these areas. Now, here's Tom.
Welcome to the Lead Counsel podcast. This is your host, Tom Tona. I'm here with Juliet. What's going on, Jules?
Welcome.
So what prompted this episode is just a conversation I want to have with you about the riches and the niches. I'm seeing a lot of quote unquote gurus out there, and it's a very catchy phrase and it's a great idea, the riches and the niches. And the concept behind it is you focus on one thing and one thing only, and that will lead to hyper focus, which will lead to hyper success in that space. And I would agree, but I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian view to the extent that maybe is the answer, right? So I thought we'd open it up with that and just do a podcast episode on that, because the more masterminds I attend, the more lack of self-assurance I see on even the most seasoned players who start to question themselves when they hear other people speaking about this is the right way to do things, right? And I really do think that what it comes down to is self-awareness, self-knowledge. So let's dig into that, Jules, and then we can chop it up however you want, all right?
Okay. Well, self-awareness, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so great question. So I did an exercise with Patrick Wilson a while back. Right. And it was based on the book Good to Great. And he said, look, let's do a hedgehog analysis of your business, which we did. But then let's do a hedgehog analysis personally for you. And the hedgehog analysis is 3 spheres that intersect in the middle. The first sphere being, what can you be the best in the world at? Right? What are you the best in the world at? Or the next sphere is, what can you also make money at? And then the third sphere is, what do you love to do? Where those 3 intersect is your hedgehog. But when I did that analysis with Patrick, what I realized is that as far as for Janira and myself, let's talk about us as a visionary integrator team. What I realized is that what I think that we are the best at in our market is running the business of a law firm, which gives me a lot of latitude. Right? I don't have to niche down. Now, I do have niches in our practice, and we'll talk about that shortly. But I also have sub-niches within those niches. I'm able to keep adding on buckets of practice areas. That's how big firms grow into big firms.
Yeah.
Right? And I know I can name off the top of my head 5 or 6 major players in the market right now, from Washington, D.C. to Palm Beach, Florida, that are 8-figure players, and they don't just have one area of practice. They have multiple silos. I like to call them silos because I like to think of them in verticals. There is some overlap and crossover, but not really. There are separate teams for each silo, and each one does the best at what they do in that silo, right? So I want to talk about how I built out from one silo of personal injury to roughly 4 silos that we have now and the continuing expansion of the firm. And I also want to talk about, for anybody that's listening to this, the mindset of what the gurus are trying to sell versus the reality.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about that, right? Go ahead.
It's also about not ditching your original area of practice as well, right? Like, you can niche down all you want, but you niched down in many different areas, but you never forgot about the personal injury silo, and you continued to build that up simultaneously while you practiced in these other areas that are all kind of under the same umbrella. Like you said, they're like vertical. They all tie into each other in some way.
Right. So look, what it comes down to is this. I started out as a personal injury attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I started out, back in 1996.
Damn.
I got my license in 94. I started out in 96 as a PI attorney.
Mm-hmm.
But then I learned a different subspecialty of law because nobody in the law firm wanted to do it. And I was always interested in adding to my skill set. So I learned deep and wide no-fault collections. At the same time, trying cases at the personal injury law firm. I tried liability. I tried damages. I was a journeyman trial guy. I talked about that before, my trial experience. And what I realized is once you have a certain skill set, let's call it trying cases for a second, you can go into any area you want.
Mm-hmm.
If you have another skill set, which is the ability to run the practice like a business. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the sky's the limit. So I was practicing probably for 5 or 6 years, pure personal injury until I had a business epiphany one day. I was like, wait, I can do on a larger scale everything I want to do. And I can continue to add because I had Janira by my side and I knew we were an unstoppable management team at that point. I don't know if I would even call it leadership at that point because we had no formal leadership training, but I knew we could scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I set up the concept of a separate silo. So we started out with personal injury, and our personal injury buckets at the time were we did auto, premises liability, general liability cases. I referred out med mal. I referred out products liability. I would refer out any kind of really specialty niche, right? And I still do because I'm not looking to become an expert in everything. And I think that no one can be a specialist in everything, but you can build out departments of specialties as long as you then man them and staff them. Staff them, not man them, but staff them with people that are competent in those subspecialties, right? So personal injury, general liability, auto, slip and fall, trip and fall, products liability, a little bit food taint cases, that type of stuff. The epiphany to grow into a second silo came from an analysis of the upstream analysis I did on personal injury. I said, look, we get a lot of cases from all of these doctors, and I have lunch with them all the time, chiropractors, physical therapists, orthopedics. And I was listening to a lot of their complaints, and they were all centered around lack of ability to get paid. And then I would ask them about the market. I would ask them about who's currently doing their collections, what their biggest gripes were, right? And it was lack of transparency. It was just lack of fierce advocacy, lack of speed in collections. So what I did was I set up in my head a separate silo. At the time, the personal injury silo was profitable. So I used that profit and reinvested it to build out this second silo. Okay, so now I've got 2 silos and I'm starting up that second one, which is no-fault collections. I got one is personal injury. I got the second is no-fault collections. So what do I start doing? I start with one doctor. I realize, okay, we're doing great. He sends us 1 file. He sends us 10 files. He then sends us 100 files. I'll never forget his name. He's still a client. But in my head, I'm like, okay, I can build this into a business. The volume then grew so fast that I started hiring staff for that silo. Fast forward to today, that silo is just as large as my personal injury silo from a revenue perspective. And we're doing 14,000 files a year from a volume perspective in that silo.
It's like a silent machine in this office.
It's a machine, right? So, but what I didn't do, and where I see a lot of people in these social media business gurus are like, within 2 years at 25, they're running a conglomerate. Bullshit. They're not running a conglomerate. They're basically saying it's a conglomerate. They're not paying all their people the right way. It's a hot mess, right? So you can't build a conglomerate overnight. You can't build multiple silos overnight. I would never tell anybody listening to this, go open up 4 silos. No, you got to get one silo that's highly profitable with regularity to allow you to then say, okay, where do I want to deploy and invest the rest of the capital coming in? Is there opportunities in the market I'm missing? So fast forward, now I'm running 2 silos and we are skyrocketing. I start to look at it and now I'm doing it for probably, so if we started the no-fault silo roughly around 2000 and We started TonaLaw in 2001. We started the no-fault silo roughly around 2004, 2006, right around that.
Okay.
I didn't then decide to launch another formal silo in terms of the way I viewed in terms of practice area for at least 10 years. 10 years of two practices growing at 20 to 50% a year until I then said, okay, I've got enough revenue now, and our leadership team, myself, Janir, and the new expanded team has gotten so good that we could easily launch another silo. So what I did was I said, okay, what were litigation cases that I used to take in because I found them challenging and we did them profitably? And I said, well, we always did breach of contract, right? Breach of contract was always attractive to me. And what I found is that we did the litigation because of the trial background that I came from and the attorneys that I hired. I found we could do breach of contract litigation better than most contract litigation firms out there, to the extent that while they hold themselves out as litigators, not a lot of the disputes that are like $1 million and less really went to trial. So what we would do is we would test the waters and we'd say, okay, we're going to take this case, take it on a hybrid contingency. I would do my calculations of risk versus reward. And then inevitably, we were seeing that we were right. Every single case we were putting to bed profitably for our clients. That's not a guarantee of results, but I was doing my analysis up front about the risk of taking them on a partial contingency. And I was right in my calculated risk that there was a lot of huffing and puffing that came from the other side, but very, very few of these went past depositions. And we're great on the litigation side. And we would have taken them to trial if they had to go to trial. So now we decided to launch the breach contract silo roughly 2 years ago. We staff it with an attorney and a paralegal. That's all they do, right? Now I got 3 niches running, so keep count. Okay. In the interim, roughly about 7 years ago, I added another sub-silo within personal injury, right? The sub-silo being mass torts, right? So we started to form really key relationships, and we started to invest very heavily in case acquisitions. It's worked out very well. Very well. Overhead is very low. For me, the way we do it under our model, highly profitable. Key relationships are the real secret sauce of mass torts, I believe. And I never looked back. I mean, I've been just steadily investing over the years in mass tort case acquisition under the guidance of my key relationships. Now at this point, I've got 4 silos running, and I'm looking at the business because, again, I'm just staffing up with people to run the logistics, the operations, and the files. I'm looking at other opportunities. I go, oh, wait a minute. There's a sub-silo not being serviced in no-fault. So the no-fault collection silo, let's talk about that for a second. The no-fault collection silo was primarily, when we started it, based on healthcare providers. I went upstream into personal injury cases that I was analyzing, and I said, well, okay, I get a lot of conversations and opportunities and sales opportunities, marketing opportunities upstream with healthcare providers. And the epiphany I had one day was, well, okay, I can get one retail personal injury case, but how many doctors touch that patient? And do they have a legal problem I can solve? Sure enough, they do. That's how I started focusing on healthcare providers. So one chiropractor can send me 100 files a year if they're high volume. One orthopedic can send me $1 million a year in collections. That's why 5 years ago, I shifted all my marketing to orthopedic, because there could be $1 million a year, one doctor.
Yeah. And let's not forget, you also do, for some of our personal injury clients, if they can apply to it, not lost wages, but reimbursements.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. That's the sub-silo I'm talking about within no-fault. So once the no-fault silo hit about 350 institutional clients, doctors, physical therapists, medical practices, some of them publicly held. Now we're at 14,000 files. But let's say when we were around 8,000 files, I started to analyze the no-fault silo and say, where are the other opportunities here? Oh, wait a minute. So there are these cases that are called basic economic loss cases that are basically personal injury clients. And I started to study the market and say, okay, personal injury firms don't handle these.
Mm-mm.
The biggest gripe that I get is people reaching out to our law firm saying, how do I get my lost wages paid? I know there are law firms that are handling the third-party bodily injury case are not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So what did I do? I started another sub-silo within no fault called those basic economic loss cases, or EIP cases, I call them, eligible injured party cases, where I started marketing to personal injury firms across New York State. They start sending me their no-fault collections. The personal injury firms that are doing that are very high volume. They don't want to handle the basic economic loss cases, so they farm them to us. So we do 6 figures a year just in revenue from those basic economic loss cases. It's a sub-silo. So now what is that? 6 different subcategory of cases or practice areas that we're in, right? So here was the epiphany that led to this conversation. One particular guru, he's got a big audience online. And listen, the guy's good, right? He knows his stuff, but he's constantly like, this is the way you do things to get to $10 million. I'm like, oh, the riches are in the niches. For sure, it can be, right? Except I have 6 niches.
I mean, yeah, you just went on describing how you found riches in the niches. So now let's tie it back to the other side.
Yeah, so my real niche is the business of law. Put me up against anybody with myself, engineer, and my leadership team, very few people are going to be able to do what we're doing, right? I know that. I say it. I'm not bragging. It just is what it is. That's my hedgehog. That is my hedgehog. So I can literally, if I decide to jump into an area of practice right now, map out a business plan, hire key people, start the marketing machine pointed in that direction, and build out whatever silo I want. Which makes me dangerous. It makes us dangerous as a firm. No, it does. I really do think that it makes us, from a competitive standpoint, it gives us the ability to be anything we want to be at scale, right? Because I've got a great marketing machine. It works. We know it works. I know where to point the dollars to drive the cases. So our firm is diversified. What I like about the multi-silo approach is it insulates you. When COVID hit and the pure PI firms in New York were terrified, and they were really terrified. I had 3 silos, 5 silos of business. So like, even though the general liability auto cases revenue was down significantly, my other stuff kept everything moving right in the direction it should be.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but coming out of COVID, you started another section of law.
Yes. Yes.
The administrative, what would we call
the
them?
academic dishonesty cases. Yeah.
So you started the academic dishonesty cases coming out of COVID because there were a lot of issues with students being remote and getting accused of cheating. And you've successfully helped many students get out of this. I don't know what you would even call it. Well,
I'll go into it with you. So I forgot all about that, right? So as a subspecialty of civil litigation that we do. So at the beginning of March of 2020, I got a call from a referral source who basically said, listen, a friend of mine needs help. His daughter was accused of academic dishonesty by a major university in Suffolk County. And they are really going after this kid. They're looking to fail her for the year and she won't be able to go to grad school. She was going to nursing school at the time. Or she planned on going to nursing school. So I look at the case, I'm like, this is going to be a cakewalk for us, right? Because it's not like personal injury, deep, complex litigation. It's not even like no fault where you got to find all the complex nuances and all the exceptions to the rules, to the exceptions. I said, this is just cut and dry and it's administrative. So I assigned an attorney. We learned the area real quick. And we went from one case in March of 2020 to a year later. We had handled about 100 of these.
Yeah.
Right?
And they still come in to this day.
Yeah. Every year, midterms and finals, the same university and other universities are dive bombing these kids with false accusations and very flimsy evidence. So we lawyer up. We just won one. Will in the office took on that same university. It's Stony Brook University. It's very public. We put it all over the internet. But Stony Brook University is known for just being very aggressive with allegations of academic dishonesty.
Mm-hmm.
And the evidence is not always strong, not even remotely credible in the majority of the instances. So Will came out of the gate, took on the case, and won. And get this, they don't even allow the attorneys to talk. They don't even allow the attorneys to talk at the hearings. But we prepared the client, we prepared the arguments, we prepare all of it. And we did talk because we're not going to allow our clients to be railroaded at these hearings. That's what we do at these hearings. So we assure they're getting due process, and where they're getting trampled on, that's where we speak up, regardless of what the university tells us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now you're talking about how many silos is that?
Like 7.
Okay. 7 silos that are running concurrently right now. We have dedicated staff to each. I spend a ton of money when I build out a silo. It's easily in excess of ballpark around $200,000. I got to have in my head, okay, this was going to cost me for 1 year with an attorney and a paralegal to build out a silo.
Mm-hmm.
But every time I've analyzed the market, I see the need. I go, look, it's going to be worth it.
Yeah.
Right. So we went from 1 case to over 100 in like 12 months, 18 months, just in that subspecialty.
Yeah.
And now we just handle them in volume.
And so I think the whole point that you were trying to reach with the contrary belief to the riches are in the niches is the fact that you can't just listen to what you hear on social media and then ditch everything that you know and try to drill down on one odd area and make it your own. It's really about building up what you're strong in, finding the subsections under that umbrella and making sure that you have the business to handle that.
Yeah,
right?
listen, I think it goes back to self-awareness, right? You heard John Fisher, his episode, I think, comes out tomorrow. But I think that John, who's a really accomplished trial guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's taken multiple 7-figure verdicts. I think it's like 7, 8, 9 million. I don't even know what his largest verdict was, but he's a trial guy.
Mm-hmm.
He said, man, I was at the last 7-figure attorney seminar that Craig hosted, and I felt such relief that Craig gave me permission to enjoy what I do, which is trial work, which I found crazy, right? Now, I understood where he was coming from. Because if you go to the 7-figure attorney seminar, you have a lot of people like me. I'm straight law business right now. I'm the business of law. I'm not touching files. That's Craig. That's me. That's Mark Whitehead, who's been on the show. But John can do both. John's very effective at doing both.
And he came on here and said that he loves to do both. He loves the trial part, honestly, more than the business part, he said, I think.
So the point of that is what does he need anybody's permission for, right? It comes down to being self-aware. So if somebody's got you questioning, do I niche down? Do I not niche down? You got to look at your strengths as a law firm leader, right? Don't do it in your first 5 years. Unless you're an entrepreneurial person and you've got entrepreneurial chops already going into the practice of law. A lot of people don't.
And that could go for any business.
Yeah, 100%. Don't try to be a conglomerate before you've started generating enough revenue to pay all your people. I was just having a conversation with somebody today, we'll have later on in the podcast, who is working with somebody who's like, I own 5 different conglomerate, this is a conglomerate business with 5 different sub-silos. I'm like, by 26? No, it's impossible, right? You have to be profitable and paying professionals. I mean, one of the key takeaways that I came from our conversation is, don't tell me you got a C-suite of professionals unless you're paying them north of $150,000 a year right now. That's what C-suite professionals get. So you can give anybody a title, but there's a big issue that comes with titling people without paying them accordingly. Now, they may be middle management. That's different. But if you don't understand the difference between C-suite and middle management, you probably are not ready to start breaking off into silos because you need people to manage.
Yeah. I think it also just comes down to the fact that on social media, you hear a lot of noise and people try to keep up with whatever anybody is saying. People will say stuff on social media. You see a 20-second clip of a podcast and you don't get the full picture. You don't understand the work that goes in behind whatever they're talking about. And then you try to replicate it. A lot of people find themselves in these holes that they can't control, or like try to build these conglomerates that end up falling apart at the seams.
Yeah, 100%. You have to do a plan, right? The first step for any business, like I look at my silos as businesses within the business. For any business, you have to do a plan that includes a budget, right? And if you don't do a plan, how are you going to succeed, right? How are you going to pay the people to build the silo? How are you going to do the marketing to build the silo? You have to have the infrastructure, you have to have the technology, and you have to have the people, right? And you got to have the money. So your first silo acts as a springboard to do the rest. Now, that doesn't mean like, take, for instance, one of the people we had on, Craig Goldenfarb. Craig is a personal injury law firm, but Craig has sub-silos within his practice, right? He's got mass torts, he's got premises liability, he's got auto, he does these AED cases where he's a nationwide expert. His lawyers can all handle the work coming in, and he's got a really strong head for business. But if you were going to ask Craig, which we'll have the opportunity to do because I want to have him on to discuss the tort reform in Florida. If you were to ask Craig, his niche, it's the business of law. He's a brilliant, brilliant business leader. So he can keep expanding however he sees fit, right? And the concept of these silos or buckets is not new. John Morgan wrote 2 books. One of them, he talks about creating buckets. He uses buckets, I use silos, but creating buckets in your practice and then filling up those buckets and then creating another bucket. It's the same thing with the silos. Fill up the silo, make it profitable, then start another silo. Why? Okay, anybody that's listening to this, especially because we're heavy with personal injury crowd, what happens if they pass tort reform in your state like they did in Florida, right? That's a question that I'm going to have Craig answer. What was the fallout for tort reform in Florida for him? But if they do that in your state, if you close your eyes and all your auto cases go away, that's what John Morgan says. Close your eyes, all your auto cases go away. So if you've run in 500 files, 85% of them go away. What does your practice look like then? Well, my practice looks fine. My practice looks fine because I'm diversified. So I took a portfolio approach to the practice and it's worked. So the reality of it is this. There is no one cookie cutter model. And whoever's listening to this has to decide for themselves, what is their strongest attribute? What is their vision? How does it tie into the big picture? And what can they afford to do right now? But the riches in the niches, yeah, that is true, but it's subject to, it depends.
Well, I have a question because we had on Mark Whitehead and he is kind of saying the opposite, right? He niched down heavily into disability.
Correct.
So if I'm not mistaken, isn't that his like main silo? Or does he have multiple other silos? Because if the state of Texas decides to make one law change regarding disability, wouldn't he be one of the people that it's like, close your eyes and all your cases are gone?
So Mark, but what I know about Mark's practice is this. One, I believe it's predominantly federal, right? So could they do away with it? They could. It's been around a long time. Mark's analysis, the way he explained it was he did a blue ocean analysis. He studied the market and said, I can keep chasing these auto cases and my cash flow is completely unpredictable, or let me look around and see where there's no competition. So he niched down on disability, but within that disability niche, he's also focused on physician disability, owner-occupied disability, meaning law firm owners and physicians that have these long-term disability contracts that then the insurance companies breach, right? He's also done veterans disability. So he's done the same type of expansion. Within that niche, he's looking for what are the other areas that he can really focus his marketing on and then develop a stream of cases just within that, that marketing concentration, right? I remember when he was doing the physician marketing. Why physicians? Well, I know he's on a percentage basis, one, and two, they're high earners. So their cases are going to be big dollars. He's a smart guy.
Yeah.
You don't just say, oh, I'm going to start a niche and throw something against the wall. You got to create bandwidth to study and analyze the market. There's a ton of blue oceans out there in the law still, right? But do people stop and take the time to analyze the market? Sure, I take auto cases. I know the niches I want to focus on in my marketing with personal injury. So we do. But it's all by design.
Yeah.
Right? So the riches and the niches is true, but you have to
take it with a grain of salt.
No, you got to broaden your horizons. Right?
Okay.
I got 6 niches. And to quote, I went to a mastermind that Bill Umansky was the head of, and he asked the question because I was talking about an issue that I was working through.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, dude, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. What's the matter with you? There's no issues here. Your business is running fine. And I was like, oh, you know what? He's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So everybody's got an opinion of the right formula. And the bottom line is only the person who's listening to this knows what's right for their law practice, their business, their job or career, and themselves personally, right? You can take advice, but it's just that. It's just an opinion. And we all know what they say about opinions. You'll have to bleep it out if I repeat it, but we all know what they say about opinions. So I think that are the riches in the niches? Sure. But if you're strong and entrepreneurial and you're a strong leader, I mean, listen, if I wanted to open up a real estate division tomorrow, I could swallow up a big part of the market locally in terms of real estate transactions or criminal or matrimonial, but I don't want to do matrimonial. But, once you have the formula down, you could just keep expanding.
Yeah.
Right? So I kind of like where we're at right now. We've got really strong momentum, but I am analyzing other areas of law. I have 1, 2, 3 ideas that I'm toying around with now about the next expansion that we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll hear about it at the leadership meeting. But
ooh,
yeah.
See you on Tuesday.
Look, again, a skill set is a skill set, right? So if you're strong at running the business, why doesn't that translate? If you're a strong litigator, you should be able to litigate anything. I know some fine trial attorneys. They could try anything. I can give them a case tomorrow. They'll try the cases. So I don't know that you have to be one specific keyhole specialist. And I do think there's a lot of risk that comes with that. And I'm going to say that, and I know it's going to be controversial, but I do think that, there's a lot of risk in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that diversifying, for me, it makes you recession-proof, and it kind of makes you bulletproof, right?
Yeah.
It's an election year coming up. You know there's going to be a lot of turmoil. Who knows what's coming next? With 6 silos all running, we should be good. We should be good, knock on wood. So you start with one thing, you find the niche, you niche down, you make it profitable. So it's self-sustaining and self-supporting within 7 to 12 months to 18 months. You don't abandon the other niche that got you there, right? The one that brought you to the dance. And again, one of the reasons I want to do this podcast is I fall prey to these gurus. I've been on coaching calls with Patrick where I'm like, are they right, Patrick? Are the riches in the niches? Should I be killing all these other silos? And he's like, are you crazy? No, you're fine the way you're doing things. Why would you even contemplate that? You can't fall prey to the noise, like you said, right? But even me, I'm not immune to it because social media conditions you. Oh, this guy must know what he's talking about. He says he's an 8-figure attorney. Yeah, he's an 8-figure attorney, all right. At 30 years old, show me your tax returns. So I will leave you with this. Riches can be in the niches, but don't close your eyes because you could easily end up in a ditch. Get it? You like that? You like that? Take it with a grain of salt. The stuff that people are putting out, a lot of them are selling you something. So what they're doing is they're recycling.
Join the team.
They're recycling a lot of other gurus' stuff. And quite honestly, there's no context for it. So one guy I know is recycling a lot of Gary Vaynerchuk stuff. He's a lawyer. He's recycling. I know. I heard him on a Gary V podcast ask a question. And I'm not calling the guy out, but I know he's recycling Gary V stuff and he's charging an arm and a leg to recycle it. It's easy to say these catchphrases, but they are nuances to it.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you made it all the way to the end, and I hope you did, take that all with a grain of salt. Do what's right for you, for your practice. I know plenty of very successful people that do personal injury and criminal defense, or criminal defense and only criminal defense, right? I know one guy who's got personal injury, criminal defense, and he's in 5 states across the country. So
it's about finding what works for you.
100%. 100%. On that note, we'll wrap it up. This has been the latest episode of Lead Counsel. I hope that you found value in it, and you can find us anywhere that podcasts are distributed. So please give us a follow, share us with your friends and your family, and give us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. We're out.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.